This one is for a specific person. The person who has watched conservatively a few hundred hours of content about mindfulness, about stoicism, about self-improvement, about inner peace and emotional intelligence and the neuroscience of thinking. The person who could explain detachment to a stranger in a coffee shop and sound impressive doing it. Who has saved quotes, highlighted passages, nodded along to ideas that felt like personal revelations. And who, if they are being honest, in the quiet part of the evening when honesty becomes unavoidable, knows that almost nothing has changed. Not the anxiety, not the patterns, not the Tuesday mornings. The knowledge is there. The change is not. And the gap between those two things is the most frustrating experience in the entire space, because it is invisible from the outside and unresolvable from the inside. And every new video watched in hopes of closing it makes it, imperceptibly, a little wider. That gap has a name in the research literature. It is called the knowing-doing gap. And it is not a character flaw, it is architecture. The brain has two fundamentally different systems for handling information and action. The first is declarative, the system that stores facts, concepts, insights, and explicit knowledge. The hippocampus, the cortical association areas, the networks that light up during learning, reading, listening. This is the system that activates when watching a video about how habits form, or why detachment works, or what the research says about morning routines. It is also the system that creates the feeling of progress because learning something new feels like changing something. The neurochemistry is nearly identical. The brain rewards the acquisition of relevant knowledge the same way it rewards relevant action. Understanding a concept produces a sense of completion, and that sense of completion is the trap, because the second system, the one responsible for actually doing things differently, operates on entirely different principles. Graybiel at MIT has spent decades studying the basal ganglia, a cluster of structures deep in the brain that manages procedural learning, habit formation, and automatic behavior. Her research, published across dozens of studies from the 1990s onward, reveals something crucial. The basal ganglia do not respond to understanding, they respond to repetition. To specific actions performed in specific contexts, enough times that the neural pathway becomes automatic. The basal ganglia do not care about insights. They do not care about epiphanies. They care about what was done, when, where, and how many times. A person can understand perfectly how habits form, can draw the habit loop on a napkin, can cite Duhigg and Clear and Wood from memory, and the basal ganglia will remain entirely unimpressed, because not a single repetition has been logged. The system that knows and the system that does are, neurologically, different organs using different fuel. That is why willpower is the wrong tool for bridging the gap. Willpower operates in the declarative system. It is a conscious, effortful, attention-dependent override. And overrides are expensive. They deplete cognitive resources. Wendy Wood at the University of Southern California published research in 2002 showing that approximately 43% of daily behavior is habitual, performed without conscious deliberation, driven by the basal ganglia and the striatum, not by the prefrontal cortex. The implication? Nearly half of what a person does in a day is not decided. It is executed from stored patterns. Changing those patterns through willpower is like trying to reroute a river by standing in it and pushing. It works for a moment, then the current wins. The path that works is different, and it is not glamorous. Gallwitzer's research on implementation intentions, the most replicated finding in the behavior change literature, shows that specifying when, where, and how a behavior will occur roughly doubles or triples the likelihood of follow-through. Not, "I will meditate more," but "tomorrow at 7:15 in the chair by the window for 5 minutes with a timer on the phone." The specificity matters because specificity is the language the basal ganglia understand. Context, cue, response, repetition. The declarative brain speaks in concepts and meanings. The procedural brain speaks in locations, times, and physical actions. And most self-improvement content speaks exclusively to the first system while hoping the second one overhears. It does not. And this is where the conversation gets honest, because there is a version of this gap that is not just neurological, it is functional. The gap between knowing and doing sometimes persists not because the doing is hard, but because the knowing is pleasant. Watching a video about meditation is neurochemically rewarding. It produces a sense of engagement, progress, and self-improvement. Actually meditating for 5 minutes in silence, as we discussed 2 videos ago, is uncomfortable, boring, and produces no immediate sense of accomplishment. The content becomes a substitute for the practice it describes. Not because the person is lazy, because the brain, given a choice between a rewarding experience that requires no effort and an unrewarding experience that requires sustained attention, will choose the first option every time, unless the second option has been externalized into a system that does not depend on motivation. That sentence is worth reading again. A system that does not depend on motivation. Because motivation is a feeling, and feelings are temporary, and anything built on a temporary foundation will collapse the first Tuesday morning that the feeling does not show up. The question is not, how do I stay motivated? The question is, what is the smallest possible action that will happen regardless of how I feel? Philippa Lally at University College London published a study in 2009 examining how long it takes for a new behavior to become automatic. The popular claim is 21 days. The actual finding was that automaticity, the point where the behavior no longer requires conscious effort, took an average of 66 days, with a range from 18 to 254. The variation was enormous, and the behaviors that became automatic fastest were not the most dramatic or ambitious. They were the smallest. Drinking a glass of water after breakfast. Walking for 10 minutes after lunch. The smaller the behavior, the faster it became automatic, because small behaviors encounter less resistance from the system that is being overwritten. So, the practical part, not a philosophy, a protocol, the smallest possible unit of change. Pick one thing, not 3 things, not a morning routine, not a system. One thing. The criterion for choosing? It must be specific enough that a stranger could observe whether it happened. Be More Mindful fails this test. No one can see mindfulness. Sit in the chair by the window at 7:15 for 5 minutes with no phone passes. It must be small enough that on the worst possible day, the day when everything is wrong and motivation is at 0, it can still happen. If the action takes more than 10 minutes or requires conditions that are not always available, it is too large. Shrink it until it is almost embarrassingly small. And then do it. Not tomorrow, not Monday, the next time the cue occurs. Once, then again, then again. Log it if that helps. A single check mark on a calendar, not a journal entry, not a reflection, not a paragraph. A mark. Evidence that the thing happened. The first week will feel pointless. 5 minutes of silence, a 10-minute walk, 1 page of writing. It does not feel like change because it is not change yet. It is the first layer of a new pattern being written into the basal ganglia, 1 repetition at a time. The feeling of change will arrive later, weeks later, sometimes months, when the behavior has become automatic and the effort required drops to near 0. That is the moment of actual change. Not the insight, not the commitment. The moment when the new behavior no longer requires a decision. And here is the quiet part of this whole conversation. The part that applies to this video, this channel, and the past 12 videos specifically. This month has covered overthinking, observation, morning routines, the dark side of detachment, relationships, non-reactivity, the trap of validation, decision-making, silence, the illusion of the breakthrough, and the real Marcus Aurelius. That is a lot of understanding, a lot of frameworks, a lot of the research shows, and the mechanism works like this. And the honest question, the one this video owes its audience is, did any of it actually change anything? Not the feeling, not the clarity in the moment of watching, the behavior, the Tuesday morning, the actual, observable, measurable thing that is now different? If yes, good. That is rare and real and not small. If no, that is also real. And it is not a failure, it is the gap. The same gap that every person who has ever understood more than they practiced knows intimately. And the gap does not close with more understanding. It closes with the smallest possible action, repeated until it disappears into habit. One thing, this week, specific, small, observable. That is the whole ask. Not because one small action will transform a life, it will not, but because one small action completed breaks the pattern. The pattern that says understanding is enough, that watching is doing, that knowing is changing. One completed action, however tiny, is proof that the gap can be crossed, and proof changes things that theory cannot. Next month, somewhere different. Into the territory this space almost never enters. Fear. Not as a feeling to overcome, but as a biological system with a function. Money. Not as a spiritual test, but as a real factor in mental health that pretending to ignore does not make disappear. And the specific lies that get told about both by the wellness industry, by the hustle culture, by the quiet voice inside that says, that stuff doesn't apply to me. It does. And Tuesday, we start there.